had grandparents who talked about not having cars around, if I can believe it. I'm trying to put the dates together. They certainly didn't have television. And yeah, they did see some of the, first cars, automobiles, which is, it's incredible to try to think about that. It's just too mind-boggling. But anyway, okay, let's go back to 1820. Most people, most Americans worked in farm labor, agriculture, 72% back in 1820. So that's quite a while ago, but grand scheme of things, not that long ago. A few generations really, 4 or so. Today, I was going to ask this as a question, but it's less than 2% of people work in farm labor now today, in the United States, that is. Once again, big tractors, if you're from an agricultural farming community, you know that tractors are better, the yields are better, and on and on. So less than 2%, can do a lot more with fewer people. All right, so in the 40s and 50s in the United States, when manufacturing jobs, that's making stuff with our hands, making a real product, a real object, was the highest, most people worked in these manufacturing jobs, 51%. So just over the majority worked in factory settings or some physical kind of labor. Now, most people work, we can guess the percentage here, in the service economy. What defines the service economy? Well, any non-manufacturing job. Any job where you're not making a physical product. So service economy is going to include a lot of jobs from healthcare and education, of course, retail. More people work at Walmart than anywhere else in the United States right now, and so retail is a huge employer too. Anyway, 70% of Americans are employed in the service economy, non-manufacturing. All right, so some pretty dramatic changes here. A relatively short period of time. All right, moving forward here. Next. More and more, people talk about how it is impossible to separate our economy from the global economy. So we're going to say a bit about the global economy real quick, and then next week we'll get into the global economy more so. All right, so global economy, that's just the world. That's the world and how it does stuff, and the totality of everything. It's kind of crazy to think about, the whole globe, planet Earth. And the split has still been, as it's been for quite a while now, between the wealthy, industrialized nations, which are typically referred to as the developed world, the West, and more often now I hear the global North. These nations, as we'll see, they list their characteristics here, are industrial-based economies still, increasingly post-industrial and service-based, but they still, do a lot of manufacturing. They still control the majority of the wealth, as we'll see next week, etc. On the other side, there are a host of other nations, the vast majority of the population of the world still, which are less developed. They are poor nations. This is sometimes the global south, the non-Western world. What are their economies like? Well, many of these nations have never gone through industrialization. So they're still existing in some sort of pre-industrial type economy. Typically agricultural, either big or small, but subsistence-based, stuff to your mouth. Not a lot of surplus, just basic stuff to people. Not a lot of physical capital and not a lot of wealth here. All right, so we'll look at reasons for the divide later, also next week. Alright, so that's the split. That's the global economy still today. And we'll look at more of that and explain more later. Alright, world economy. Economic systems and now globalization. I'm trying to explain the world and trying to explain which nations go where and things like that. The old model, this is in the past now, was based on a split between the communist nations, led by the USSR, that's the Soviet Union. They were very powerful. Even, not as, the wealth wasn't as distributed, but they were, they put people on the moon, they had sophisticated technology in some ways, always a little bit hot behind the West. But in other ways, they were ahead. They did, what was the first rocket in orbit, I think. Sputnik was, a Soviet rocket. So they were ahead in some ways, too. Anyway, communist nations, one power holder. On the other side were the capitalist nations led by the USA after World War II when they gained so much power. And these countries were market-based, and we'll say more about that here, too. They're capitalist. We'll say more about what this means. Okay, what is communism in a nutshell? Well, as an economic system, it's based on more government say in the economy. So what does that mean? What does that mean, say, for everyday sort of things? Well, in the Soviet Union, for example, things like tires, and how many tires would be produced, et cetera, were decisions made by who? Private individuals or the government? Well, typically the government had at least some say in it, in terms of the major, the oil of the what oils come in. The major decisions of the economy were influenced by the government. The government has a much larger say. Okay, so that's just a simple way to summarize it. We could say a lot more. By the 1990s, most communist governments had collapsed. We could get into reasons why, maybe your other classes, your political science classes, we'll get into all that stuff, and you get some of that history. I lived through this history, and I remember as a kid, it was a big deal when the Berlin Wall came down, and right before that, the Soviet Union went through this period called perestroika, where they were trying to reform and enter the new world, on and on. Okay, so, major changes though. Change the world. Today there are only 5 or 6 nations that have a communist government. China, of course, we'll say more about them, we'll see more too in the video. North Korea, of course, Vietnam, still a communist too, Laos, and Cuba. Alright, so let's see, global economy and globalization. Why is this important? Why does this matter for us today? We'll see why. We'll see in the video, clearly, see examples, and there'll be obvious and direct impact for us too when it comes to jobs, and we'll get there. Alright, so maybe this is common knowledge, maybe not. Alright, today, without the powerful communist influence, now the Soviet Union is not officially communist, right? They've got, the government's got issues, but not officially communist anymore. They've opened up to trade. China, as we'll see, is communist, but they've opened up to trade with the West. Okay, so what's that led to? Essentially, capitalist economies have spread across the world, even in communist China. Capitalism is what rules, now in terms of the economy at least. What has this led to? People argue, well, more globalization. How so and why? Well, when you're trading with a country like China, now we can do business with China. We can do business with Russia. Our businesses can go there. Their businesses can come here. Japan was never communist, but back and forth there. Even South Korea, car brands there. What Kia? Kia is Korean, right? South Korean, I think. Is Kia Swedish? What I'm thinking of?
I think that's
IKEA
is Swedish, yeah.
I'm thinking of car brand, but no, IKEA's. That's a good example though too. IKEA, and yeah, we've got IKEA now. It is a Swedish brand. Yeah. Okay, that's a good example. Anyway, globalization, spread around the world. Interaction with our economies. That's buying and selling stuff, but also politics and culture. We'll say more about culture and stuff next week. so increased globalization. We'll see that with video too, which is where we're headed. Okay, with that said, let's move forward here. Let's say a couple things about capitalism. Here with capitalism, we're going to do some detailed points, but if you've got a rough sense, if you've already taken some of these other classes that are out there, there's really good international studies classes I know that are on campus, excellent classes that cover all this stuff in great detail. Anyway, if you got that stuff, you know what we're doing, you don't need point by point necessarily, but what is capitalism essentially? What's it all about? Well, in comparison to communism, the features that separate capitalism start with private property, that individuals, you, me, us, Sam Walton, who we'll see, just regular Joe Schmoes on the street, can own great wealth. They can own their own property. Take any of our major corporations, they're privately owned. They're owned by individuals, private citizens. Okay, what drives capitalism? Profit, money making, trying to make a profit. That's 2. 3, what is the idea behind capitalism that makes it go? Well, competition between IKEA and Walmart, for example, or IKEA now, because they're high-end, kind of not, right, fancier, nicer stuff. And what's the other ones? I guess I don't know, another retailer like that. I guess they're competition still with Home Depot in some ways, maybe. But anyway, competition between businesses for better stuff, lower prices. That's the idea that fuels capitalism as an economy. Again, making stuff, buying stuff. Adam Smith was very important here as one of these thinkers about capitalism. He believed that capitalism was the best system, the best possible system, because he thought most people are greedy, most people want more stuff, they want to become wealthy, and that's actually going to fuel our economy. It's going to make it more competitive, it's going to make it leaner, it's going to make businesses want to make a better product for us, it's going to lower prices. In the end, society will be better off in comparison to communism, which is based more so on government decisions and a disconnect there. So that's the argument. Of course, we can argue and stuff later about capitalism. We'll see the downsides throughout the semester, but that's capitalism in a very condensed summary. All right, so let's look, this next slide here to just general trends is what we're going to go for. I'm going to put up a lot of stuff. All we need to know here is that there are different kinds of capitalism. We want a rough sense of the different types. Again, a lot of stuff here listed. Try to think of just the 1 or 2 points here. I'm going to list it all right now, and then we'll just try to make sense of it. Okay, so, United States, as a country, its type of capitalism is this first one. Corporations, businesses fit here under corporate capitalism. Corporate capitalism is based on businesses being allowed to do more stuff, basically. Giving more power to businesses and to private individuals in some cases. We'll see with Sam Walton here later, how he built Walmart. So there's certain outcomes. People will get into arguments here, but that's one type of capitalism. Corporate capitalism, built on corporations. So worry less about the outcomes here is what makes corporate capitalism. Corporations, okay. Cooperative capitalism is a little bit different because now we have more say from governments and more say between, say, workers and their bosses, between managers and labor unions, for example. And so cooperative capitalism is more like what they have in Europe, and so there's more of a balancing. Here, there's no question. Corporations, CEOs rule the economy. There, you see a little more balance, a little more say from the workers, and it's more cooperative. That's where we get the name. Okay. So again, just the general sense. Okay. Lastly, state capitalism. what makes this form different? Well, much more government say. Here, essentially, the government is directing, having a bigger influence on what happens. What does that mean? Well, we'll see it in the video here. China, for example, can say how much. They can still influence how much gets made, what gets made. The market itself isn't going to decide. China as a government will decide some of these questions. So again, just the types. Don't worry about the outcomes and all that stuff. All right, so those are the three forms of capitalism. So capitalism comes in different forms. All right, next, some ideas about world capitalism here, and we're going to finish up with notes here in a minute. Yeah, not too much more with notes. Not a lot of time. Get right into this video here, which won't be too long either. But we'll cover a lot of these topics. So I want to talk about some of these things here first. All right, so multinational corporations here. When it comes to world capitalism, today, multinational corporations are very important. They're really what is, driving the system, the new system. Multinational corporations simply have manufacturing in one part of the world. They may have their offices in another part of the world, their IT department in yet another department of the world, another part of the world, and so they're everywhere around the globe. I dropped off my stuff for Comcast, and I gave them the physical stuff. But if I called someone, who am I going to talk to? Someone somewhere in the world. Yeah, more than likely India today. All right, so you guys know this stuff. Anyway, Thomas Friedman is an economist. He had this idea in this book called The World is Flat. Simply to summarize and to give a name or an idea to what's going on across the world. There aren't these boundaries. There aren't these walls anymore. People buy, sell, interact. All right, so how so, and in what ways here? Let's look at some important I was going to say aspects, but they're agreements, they're organizations that make global capitalism work. Starting with NAFTA. NAFTA, anyone know what NAFTA is right off the top of your head? What it means for us and why it's been so important? It's basically...
They kind of regulate trading between different countries?
Yeah. Yeah, in this one in particular, in North America. Yeah, exactly. So, right, so what's that mean every day for us in, say, Mexico? Now we can send jobs down there. They can, they don't send too many here, right? Mostly we send a lot of jobs down there. That's just, yeah, we'll be about that. So yeah, lots of businesses set up shop there. American corporations can move to Mexico, and GM, and all of our major corporations. Not all, but most have, the manufacturing ones probably haven't thought about going to Mexico, or maybe have in the past. Okay, so that agreement allows us to do that, us being the United States. Okay, WTO is the World Trade Organization. We'll see mentions of that, I think, to the video here and there. Next week we'll see definitely the TO brought up. Again, supervises world trade. Just organizes things. And in many ways, does make some pretty important choices about how world trade's going to work, and so on. The World Bank provides loans to the poor nations, the developing nations, to try to fuel business, to try to fuel their economies. Yeah?
Where does the money come from?
Good question. That's a very good question. That,
do a whole bunch of countries pay for it?
That is a question for an economist, because there's an easy answer and there's a more complicated answer, I think. Where does the money come from? Where does any money come from today? We could get into the issues here, but banks have a lot of money. And yeah, that money comes from, some cases, governments, some cases, other businesses. There's a complicated answer there. Simple answer, too, is where does our money come from? Dollars? Well, it used to be the gold standard, and all our money used to be backed in gold, but it's more complicated now. But yeah, where does the money come from? That's a very good question. Wealthy nations in a lot of cases. Wealthy governments, wealthy corporations. Okay, so IMF also, has access to these funds and so on, and they also oversee trade and so on. Okay, so these are, organizations that really, again, drive world capitalism. We could say more about these organizations, about who elects people in the WTO. Does anyone in the WTO get elected? No. These are independent organizations. They've got a lot of power, and we could get critical. We will later. Okay, so that's what we looked at the Seattle protests last week, and we just mentioned it, and the Occupy Wall Street stuff. In a lot of ways, they're complaining about this kind of stuff. How much power these banks have and these systems have. Okay, so moving forward. Just a real quick depiction. The typical car is made everywhere now. So, different parts and again, depicting globalization here. So even your American cars are going to be made all over the world. Okay, so a couple more points here. And then we'll get to starting the video.